Good afternoon, everyone. So the purpose of this research was to look at sprint courses and their influence on academic outcomes. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Danita Hull, and I am a second-year psychological science master's student. I currently work in Dr. Debbie Ma's Stereotyping and Prejudice Lab, as well as the CSUN Sports Psychology Lab. In addition, I'm currently a graduate research assistant in institutional research. This research specifically focused on two questions. Do sprint courses increase the amount of units a student takes in their second year? And what factors predict enrollment in a sprint course? So the purpose of sprint is to keep students on track to graduate with the hopes that it keeps them close to 30 or more units per year. This is different than regular summer enrollment because these students actually receive grants to complete these courses. The goal of this study was to see if sprint really does keep people on track to graduate and keep them close to 30 or more units in their second year. So our participants included 4,790 first-time freshmen and first-time transfer students from 2019 through 2021. Our sample was mostly female, mostly first generation, mostly Pell recipients, and majority Latinx, followed by white students, Asian American students, and Black and African American students. In addition, each analysis controlled for first-generation status, high school GPA, Pell status, race/ethnicity, and sex. Our main independent variable was the number of sprint courses taken, but we also looked at binary sprint enrollment, so basically just whether or not a student took a sprint course at all. Our dependent variables included the total units taken, which included winter and summer, as well as just one's fall and spring units taken in their second year. So if you look at our graph, you can see that the majority of students did not take a sprint course. So overall, only about 16.8% of students, or 807 students, took a sprint course. Of these 807, 164 took 2 sprint courses. And the reason we looked at total units taken including winter and summer enrollment, as well as just their fall and spring units taken, was to see if sprint students were taking more units in the general academic year overall, or if it was just these sprint courses taken over the summer that made a difference in total second year units. So our first analysis looked at who was most likely to enroll in a sprint course, and we did find some differences across different demographic groups. So white students and Asian students were the most likely to take a sprint course. They were about 7% more likely than Black and African American students to take a sprint course, and 5% more likely than Latinx students. In addition, continuing generation students were 4.25% more likely than first generation students to take a sprint course. Females were 7% more likely than males to take a sprint course, and Pell recipients were about 3% more likely to take a sprint course than non-Pell recipients. We also looked at the predicted probability of taking at least one sprint course by high school GPA. We did find that high school GPA was the biggest predictor of whether or not one took a sprint course. So for each 1 unit increase in high school GPA, we saw chances of taking a sprint course go up by 6.7%. So this was a pretty big increase. So our next analysis examined whether sprint courses increased likelihood of taking more units in one's second year. So specifically, these analyses examined the influence of sprint course enrollment predicting units taken during a student's second year. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we examined both fall and spring units as well as total units to see if summer and winter courses are what kept students on track, or sprint students took more units during the general academic year as well. However, for the sake of brevity, we will be focusing on total units later on in these analyses. So, if you look at the graph, you can see that during spring and fall, students who took 1 summer or 2 summers worth of sprint courses took about 30% more units than the students who did not take a sprint course. Then if we move to the right side of the graph, we can see that students who took 1 summer's worth of courses took 41% more total units, including winter and summer enrollment. And students who took 2 summers worth of sprint courses took 62% more units, including winter and summer enrollment. So as you can see by this graph, it really does seem like sprint keeps students on course to graduate by keeping them close to 30 or more units in their second year. So following this, we looked at whether or not this might differ by race and ethnicity or Pell status. And interestingly, we actually found that it did not. So across racial and ethnic groups, as well as Pell and non-Pell recipients, the influence of sprint courses seems to remain the same. So students who take one sprint course take about 40% more total units, and students who take 2 sprint courses take about 60% more total units in their second year. And this did not differ across different demographic or socioeconomic groups. So now I just want to go over the main takeaways. So it does seem like certain groups are more likely to enroll in Sprint. This included females, continuing generation, Pell students, white and Asian students, and students with higher high school GPAs. In addition, Sprint students are also inclined to take more units during the regular academic semesters, even without counting their Sprint units. Thirdly, Sprints kept students on track to graduate by keeping them close to or above 30 units per year. And finally, the effect of Sprint on units completed was very similar across racial and ethnic groups, as well as Pell versus non-Pell recipients. Thank you so much for your time. That is the end of the presentation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.